everyone. Like you just heard, my name is Carol Bliese, and I am the Senior Director of Teacher Programs here at Population Connection. I have been with Population Connection and working within the PopEd program for just over 14 years now. I have had that pleasure. Thank you for participating in this poll. I think we've closed it down, and seeing the results, it looks like our largest percentage of folks, their favorite subject in school was science. Well, let me tell you, you would have loved population education lessons. Number 2 in line is social studies, and you guys are right there too. So this will be great. This will be some content that you all are really gonna enjoy. Looking at our next question about if you recall ever learning about population during your K-12 schooling. I'm overjoyed to hear that about 40% were. For the 61% of you who do not recall that, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but you'll be pleased to know that for the 3 million students we reach with PopEd, they won't have that same problem. So I want to go ahead and get started, but again, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to learn about the population education program and how we are striving to make a difference in the lives of students all over the country. So a pretty obvious place to start is to point out that population education is a program of Population Connection. That being said, because of our specific work, we do have our own mission that helps guide us. And you'll see it here on your screen. Our mission is to provide quality training and teaching materials for educators to help them teach about population and related topics effectively in the classroom. So a couple key things here. One is that we work with teachers. We do not work directly, with some exceptions, with students. And that the work that we do with teachers falls into 2 big categories. On one hand, the professional development trainings that we facilitate, and then on the other hand, the teaching materials that we develop and create and distribute to educators. So I'll go through both of these in more detail throughout our time together. But before I do that, I also want to speak to our ultimate goal. Our vision in the population education program, or our goal, is that we want every young person prepared to tackle global problems and to be positively engaged in their communities as the next generation of voters, parents, leaders, and policymakers. You'll notice I say, or the vision says global problems. Of course, that includes population growth, but it also includes many related large-scale challenges, things like climate change, gender equity, mass extinction, wealth inequality. We want today's young people, today's students, to be ready to tackle these issues in both an informed and inspired way. And let me tell you, this is a really unique program. We are the only national organization that focuses on educating young people about population. We've carved out a really important space within K-12 education. It's something that teachers want. As this quote shows, this was from a teacher who attended a workshop facilitated by one of our volunteers out of Rock Springs, Wisconsin. And it says, the idea of making students aware of these topics. I don't think there's enough information or education in schools on this. We need to start when they're young to educate students about these ideas. So in our teacher training workshops, which I facilitate frequently, we often share a global population counter. Share with participants, our participating teachers, the magnitude of our global family. With numbers large, it can be hard for people, adults and children alike, to get their head around what that is, right? And is a billion really that much more? Additional zeros. So I thought it might be a short that we have for students to help them contextualize large numbers. So we're going to start off with this billion-dollar question, and I am actually going to ask that you respond to this in the chat. If you are new to Zoom, you access the chat by clicking on, I believe it's a little speech bubble icon on the platform, and then you can respond. You can via typing in the chat. So here's the situation. Your rich uncle has left you $1 billion, but there's a catch. You must count the $1 billion at the rate of $1 per second, and you must count it for 8 hours a day. So this is your full-time job. Only after you have finished counting it are you allowed to spend the money. So my question is, do you accept the $1 billion? Do you accept this money from your generous, wealthy uncle? If you were offered $1 billion. Does anybody want to respond? Okay, I'm seeing a couple no's. And I kind of wonder, is that just because you're not materialistic? You don't care about money. Other things are more necessary. Well, Terry says, I would be dead. Oh, there we've got a yes. We've got a couple yeses, some emphatic no's. Okay, well, let's take a look, depending on whether it was yes or no in your response. If you were to count $1 billion at that rate, it would take you over 95 years to count. I hope I am not surprising anyone when I say I don't know that any of us are going to be around in 95 years. So it would take us 95 years to count $1 billion. What if we change that question a little bit though? And we say that your uncle has made the same offer, but with $1 million. Same contingencies, you're counting at the rate of $1 per second, 8 hours a day. Does anyone change their answer? Is anyone willing to take the money now for $1 million? Nancy says yes. I see some definitelys. Give it a try. Awesome. And you know what? I would too, because to count $1 million at that same rate, it would take you about 35 days. So when we are comparing $1 billion to $1 million in this context, we are comparing 95 years to 35 days. That is the significance of those 3 measly zeros in our place value. It is a dramatic difference. In the riddle that we offer for educators to use with their students, we also include this million billion comparison in terms of age. So it ultimately gets to the point to share that if you were 1 billion seconds old, you would be about 31.5 years old. Versus 1 million seconds old, you would be about 11.5 days old. Now, I know that we had some educators who are planning to attend based on some of the pre-submitted questions. So because throughout our time together, I am going to share some of these different, what could actually be classroom activities. I'm going to go ahead and share them in the chat. So in the chat box, you'll find a link that will take you to our population education website where you could actually download these particular riddles. So you can grab that if you're interested. Okay, now fun's over. Back to the real. It's still fun. So I want to return to our mission to just take a look, like I said, at these 2 big areas within PopEd where we work. So I'm going to start with our training workshops. As I mentioned, these are specifically for teachers and educators. We don't work directly with students in the classroom in any significant volume. Now, these educators could be current classroom teachers, and that could be at a public school, a private school, a parochial school, a charter school, international school, alternative school, you name it. They could also be non-formal educators working at something like a STEM center or a zoo or a history museum. And then we also work with pre-service teachers, and that means folks that are pre their service as a teacher. So these are people going through a college or university program to get their teaching degrees or certificates. Now, during a workshop, a facilitator will model PopEd teaching activities. So we get the educators participating in the lessons as though they were students, even if that means role-playing a growing flower as a first grader would. And that's what you see in this picture in the upper right of your screen, or coloring in a pie chart on a paper plate, as you see in the lower right. And historically, our workshops have all been facilitated in person, but like everything else in our lives, that changed last spring. So starting in March to COVID and distance learning, we have been offering online workshops. And to support this undertaking, our team has developed all sorts of digital tools that mimic our in-person simulations and games. We've also created demonstrations that can be done on camera. We've constructed online investigations that mimic some of our in-person inquiries. So we've had a lot of fun moving into this virtual setting. And I'll go ahead and toot our own horn for a second. They have been wildly successful. Here are just two recent emails that we received. They are not actually all that unique. On the left-hand side, you see an email that we received from a professor at UNC Chapel Hill after an online workshop facilitated by my colleagues Raf and Laura. It says, "Wow, what a marvelous workshop this morning. You provided such an engaging introduction to population education that was helpful, interesting, and that modeled best practices in pedagogy online." On the right-hand side, you see an email that we received a couple weeks ago. This is an instructor from the University of South Florida. This was following a webinar that our teacher training manager, Lindsay Bailey, and I facilitated. And it offers that same sentiment. So teachers and educators and other folks within the education sector are really finding our online and webinars useful, which is wonderful. And the great thing is that this format will remain. I mean, we're not going to get rid of this. Now that we've developed it, we're here to stay in this format. So we're going to keep doing this even in a post-pandemic world. I think on one hand, I'm not sure virtual learning is really ever going to go away at this point. In some capacity, it's probably going to stick around. But there's also the fact that we have always received requests from classes that are just taught online or schools that are looking for professional development online, and we haven't been able to fill them, and now we can. This also will be useful when we receive requests for workshops in areas where we can't send a staff member or we don't have a trainer. So these aren't going anywhere, is my point. Let's see, this chart shows some responses from teachers who were asked to rate our workshop in relation to other professional development experiences that they've had. We ask this of teachers because, let's be real about where education is right now in the United States. It's typically underfunded. It is typically understaffed. So from a very real business or marketing side of things, you know, we are competing out there for pretty limited resources of schools and districts and teachers. And by resources, I don't just mean money, but time, you know, the ultimate resource. So with schools and teachers stretched so thin, we need to be top notch in our delivery, in our usefulness, in everything. And as this graph shows, we're doing well in that regard. So here we have a graph. I thought some of you might be, or not a graph, a chart rather. I thought some of you might be interested to see how our program has grown over the years. Population Connection has been around since the 1960s. The education program began in 1975. This chart starts us off in the year 1986 when we had 28 workshops and were able to train just shy of 600 teachers. Last year in 2019, we had over 700 workshops and we were able to train over 12,000 teachers. So we have a pretty big reach that we're very happy about and very proud of. So this is our historic reach, but the next thing I want to share is actually our geographic reach. So I'm going to put some of you on the spot again. We're going to do another poll question to get you guys thinking a little bit. So you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen, and it says, in which US state were the most population education workshops held over the past 5 years? So you have 6 choices. Go ahead and guess which state you think it is. One of these is my home state. So I might give people actually, I won't say anything else. I don't want to give you any. I feel like a horse or something. It's close behind. Iowa lagging. Maybe there's an injury. Okay, I'm going to give you, I don't know, 10 more seconds to think about this. Okay, I'm going to end our polling. And it looks like most people are thinking it is California. In fact, over half of our lovely audience thinks that that is correct. I am sorry to say that you are wrong. 6 of you, however, were correct in your response. The state where we have had the most workshops over the last 5 years is Texas. We have had 278 workshops in Texas over the last 5 years. That is followed by Florida, where we had 217. Spots number 3 and 4 go to California. So everybody who said California, you were right in the mix, and North Carolina. Now, Texas might surprise folks, but there's a pretty specific reason for it. In Texas's teaching standards, world geography is a required class in middle school. So every middle schooler will take world geography as their social studies class at some point in middle school. And we in population education have a ton of great resources for world geography. So we do a lot of work in Texas. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit and move on and talk about our resources. I think it's important to showcase that our teaching materials cover more than just human numbers. We cover more than just population dynamics, population history, demographics. So we, of course, cover all of those vitally important things. We also take a really broad view of all of the topics that relate to population. So we have resources that fall into sort of 2 big themes outside of demographics. An environmental bucket or theme of sustainability, and then a societal theme of global citizenship. And you can see just a couple examples of topics that might fall under these 2 areas. These lists are by no means exhaustive. They're just a taste of some of the topics. I'll also point out that, as you can imagine, these topics aren't exclusive of each other. So, you know, urbanization rates can impact habitat, and resource use and climate can impact human rights and public health. So there's a lot of versatility and intermixing within the topics that we cover. And this is really useful because it means that we fit really well based on the topics, the issues, the themes into many different subject areas. The most popular areas where we fit into and where we do the most work is with educators of science classes and social studies classes. The next area where we're working with the most teachers is math. So we do a fair amount of work with math teachers because we have great data sets. Think about those topics you saw on the last screen. There's so much data involved at all different levels. that we can provide really authentic learning opportunities for teachers who want to integrate math skills. We do a bit of work with family and consumer science teachers, some supplemental English as a second language or technology classes. I will point out what's not listed here, and that is sex ed, as well as health. You know, we are not a sex ed provider. Do we think sex ed is vitally important and vitally crucial and should be included in every school? Yes, we do. That being said, that is not our particular role. When age and developmentally appropriate, we do absolutely have lessons that cover things like family size decisions and fertility rates and different cultural, societal, environmental, whatnot, things that influence that. So whether that is the education and schooling of girls and how that plays a role, whether that is contraception access and gender equity. You know, we cover those influential topics, but we do not teach reproduction. I also think actually it's important to mention and this seems like as good a time as any, that we within the PopEd program, we are educators, we are not advocates. Our program wouldn't hold water within the educational sphere if this wasn't the case. So in addition to creating resources that are value-free, we also develop them with required teaching standards in mind. So we look at all 50 states' required content standards, and we take that into consideration. And the good news is that most state standards include population at least the high school level. And every state includes topics on human environment interactions, humans as part of Earth's physical system, the pressures we put on our social systems, you know, and those many topics from the previous screen. So if a teacher wants to use PopEd, they have lots of opportunities and ways to do so. Our resources do work for kindergarten through the 12th grade. So we have materials for educators at all levels. Folks typically have a pretty easy time understanding how we fit into those secondary classes. It might be a bit more unclear how we support elementary teachers. For young learners, our lessons really focus on foundational information that will later prop up students' understanding of things like push-pull factors of migration or the dependency ratio, the connection between resource extraction and human rights. But while they're still very young, we have students exploring basic environmental stewardship, physical geography between living things and in these photos, these are some photos teachers shared with us. On the left-hand side, those are from a second grade class. They're doing one of our lessons that looks at resource use and crowding. And then on the right-hand side, this is from a first grade classroom. They're creating a word web around the central concept of more people. So they're looking at different things that they might have more or less of when we have more people. Why teachers love PopEd? I'm going to sort of skip this, but I'll just say that there's a lot of reasons beyond just the content that they find it really useful. I might take the second to point out the fourth bullet, that they're actionable. Our lessons don't just inform students of global issues, but they really provide opportunities for children and teens to investigate solutions and to participate in cooperative problem solving. And these positive actions are built right into the lessons. So teachers can successfully and easily, hopefully, guide their students towards that feeling of empowerment. Lastly, we really strive to make our activities engaging and fun. I mean, if a lesson doesn't grab a student's attention and engage them and stick with them, some of the other things don't arguably matter quite as much. So in terms of being engaging, visual, creative, I thought I'd share an example with you. So I am going to do that using a lesson that we have called the Stork and the Grim Reaper. In most states around the US, the concepts of the birth rate and the death rate are taught somewhere between 7th and 10th grade. The birth rate is the number of births per 1,000 people annually. The death rate is the number of deaths per 1,000 people annually. Now, we could make these definitions a bit more interesting by sharing some real world numbers. Giving that real world context, using real world data, that's something we always strive to do. We don't particularly like to talk in hypotheticals. So with this information, there's some things we can see here. The global birth rate is higher than the global death rate. Depending on your number sense, you might point out that the global birth rate is more than twice as large as the global death rate. But this arguably isn't the most interesting information. So what we do is we go further and we assign characters to these two statistics. We have a stork to represent the birth rate and the Grim Reaper, dun, 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 to represent the death rate. And we use them in a visual demonstration that I am going to do for you right now. So I just stopped sharing my screen. If you have me on gallery view, you might want to change it to speaker view. On a computer, you do that by going up into the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And there's a little button that you can click that says view, and you can just change it to speaker view. And that'll, I think, pop me up so I'm larger on the screen. And I'm just going to pull a couple things out here, attempt not to clothesline myself on my headphone cord, and I'll do this quick demonstration. So in this demonstration, I want your focus right here on this bowl full of water. The bowl itself represents the earth. The water inside represents our human population. Now I am going to add and remove water to this bowl to represent the birth rate and the death rate, because ultimately the birth rate is people being added to the planet. The death rate is people being removed from the planet. Now, you might recall from my slides that currently the global birth rate is 19 and the global death rate is 8. Shocking information, those two numbers are not the same. So I am not going to move water back and forth using the same size measuring cups. The birth rate is going to get a 1 cup measure. The death rate is going to get a 1/3 cup measure. In a classroom, I would have students come up and wear name tags, one being the stork, one being the Grim Reaper. Because I'm a versatile actress, I will take on both roles today. So here is the stork adding water to represent the birth rate. Here is the Grim Reaper removing water to represent the death rate. And in this demonstration, we just keep doing this 1-to-1. The birth rate adds water, death rate removes water. If you have good eyesight and a computer that has pretty high pixel levels, you might see that there is a line here that showed where the level of the water started off. So as we continue this demonstration, adding water to represent the birth rate, removing water to represent the death rate, you see that the level of the water increases. And the level of the water is increasing because we are adding more water than we are taking away. And that's how the birth rate and the death rate impact our global population. That's how they impact our planet. When the birth rate is higher than the death rate, when you add more people to the earth than are removed from the earth, a population will grow. Through most of history, these two numbers were pretty close together. And that's why our population didn't grow very much for so long. During the Industrial Revolution, the stork's measuring cup drastically decreased in size as the death rate dropped. And that gap between those two numbers is ultimately what led to or allowed for our population to take off the way that it did. So that's just one example of how you can take some perhaps dry statistics and make them a little bit more interesting. I'm going to check my time and see if I do, or I'm going to take it anyway. time to actually share one more activity with you all. Oh, you know what though? I had said that I would paste these lesson plans. So let me paste in the chat the activity where you would be able to find that demonstration of the stork and the Grim Reaper. So you'll find that in your chat box right now. The next one that I want to share with you is one of our most popular teaching activities. It's one that's been around for a long time. It's called Earth, the Apple of Our Eye. And it helps students explore two big questions. The first being, how much of the earth is used for agricultural land? And how does my diet impact that? So I guess that was a little bit of a waste of time for me to turn my shared screen back on, because I'm going to turn it back off and do another demonstration. But in this one, we are going to use an apple to serve as a model for the earth. So this right here, this is our planet Earth. And what I am going to do is cut up our earth, and I'm going to continue to remove pieces from it until we get down to the fraction that represents arable land, okay? So the very first thing I'm going to do with our apple, with our earth, is I'm going to cut it into 4 equal pieces. And if I have anybody out there who's interested in having some engagement, go ahead and pull up your chat, because I am going to, from our model of the earth, I am going to remove 3 pieces. Does anyone know, and you can respond in the chat, what covers approximately 3/4 of the planet? Water, that is absolutely correct. A big portion of that water is oceans, but it also includes other areas of water. We get food from our waters, that is absolutely true. But in this particular lesson, we are focusing on arable land. So we are going to look at just this fraction of our apple. So about 1/4 of the earth is land. But if you've ever really thought about it, if you've traveled around, if you watch a lot of National Geographic, you will know that we can't grow food on all of this land, and people don't live on all of this land. So I'm going to take our land and I'm going to cut it in half. So I'm taking 1/4 of the apple and I'm cutting it in half. Who says you can't practice fractions while learning about geography? And I will take half of our land and set it aside. This half of our land, or 1/8 of our apple, represents inhospitable lands. It's places where people don't tend to live, and they're very harsh environments. It would be very, very difficult, not impossible per se, but very difficult to grow food. Does anybody want to take a guess at what are some geographic areas that would be considered inhospitable? What type of land is it that we cannot grow food? Hit me up in that chat box. They're coming in fast, and absolutely. In fact, Terry, I don't know who you are, but you got the big 3 right off the bat. High Rocky Mountains, arid deserts, and places that are very cold, frozen tundra, areas of permafrost, so on and so forth. So we are going to set aside our inhospitable land, and that leaves us with 1/8 of our apple. So this is our arable land. But let's be real, we do a lot more with our lives here on Earth than just grow food. We go to baseball games, and we go to races, and we visit our grandmothers, and we do all of these different things, or at least we used to. Now we do it a little bit wearing masks, and hopefully we'll do it in the future. But nonetheless, I am going to take this 1/8 of our apple, and I am going to cut it into 4 pieces. So once I've done that, I'll take 3 of these pieces and set them aside. So this is 3 30-seconds of our apple. These are areas where we could grow food, but we don't, because we use these areas for other things. Housing, any place that there's a building, any place that's paved, whether that is a sidewalk, driveway, city street, parking lot, tarmac, whatever it might be. Places for conservation or wildlife that we've set aside and said we're not going to develop or use for agriculture. Places for our industry, places we use for recreation. So there's a lot that falls into these 3 seconds. And that leaves us with 1/32 of our apple. And just to be really nice and specific, I'm going to cut the peel off of this to represent topsoil. That thin, relatively, layer of hopefully nutritious soil that sits on the top of the planet. This little piece right here, and I have another apple just for the sake of comparison, this represents the topsoil we have available on the planet to feed the almost 8 billion of us who live here. This is not a big piece, and that almost 8 billion is increasing, right? So what does this mean for us? This demonstration is so powerful, and it is a wonderful jumping off point for discussions at a variety of different levels. And the different levels, sort of where we go from here, really depends on the age of the students with whom we are working. So with older students, we could be talking about desertification of soil and how biomes are changing because of climate. With younger students, maybe we're talking about erosion and what are things that cause erosion. How can we combat erosion? What can we do to preserve our healthy soil? So we really strive in our lessons to not end in any sort of doom and gloom, but to explore with students and have them take the forefront in looking at solutions to some of our most pressing issues on the planet. Let's see, I have really got to wrap us up. So I am going to head back to my slideshow. The second question here looks at diet. I'm going to skip that for now, but again, I am going to post this particular lesson plan, or share it, I should say, in the chat box, so you can grab it there if you're interested in seeing more. I just have to give a shout out to our World Population Dot video, or Heartbeat video. Different people know it by different names. It's probably our most well-known teaching resource. It is also now part of an interactive website that I have also shared in the chat. That is worldpopulationhistory.org. It is such a robust and comprehensive look at the history of human population growth and so many aspects and things that are involved with it. We developed it for use in high school classrooms, but it is absolutely that every single person in this Zoom could go into right now, and I guarantee go down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden you'll think, why am I hungry? Oh, because it's dinner time, and you'll have spent, you know, time just exploring this website. So it's really cool. I suggest you check it out. In addition to lesson plans, which is really what I focused a lot on, we do develop all sorts of other things for teachers to use, both readings that students can read at a variety of different ability levels. We have posters for decorating classrooms, infographics for putting into PowerPoint presentations. I do have to take 30 seconds to mention this final bullet, our student video contest. The World of 7 Billion student video contest is one of the, I would say, more exciting ways that we can really engage with students directly and inspire them to be global change makers. It's a contest that is now in its 10th year, and it challenges students to take global population growth and connect it to another challenge. And they do this in a 60-second video. They have to offer a sustainable solution. I just pasted the website for the video contest in the chat bar. Go in and watch some of the past winners. You will be blown away by some of these student filmmakers. They are just phenomenal. It makes me think that our planet is in good hands. We really strive to make our resources, to keep them current, both in terms of trends in education, current events, new technologies. I'll just leave it at that. because the thing I do want to end on is just letting you know about our trainers network. We do over 700 teacher training workshops every single year, and we could not do it without this amazing network of volunteer educators. We have over 700 trainers in our network. They typically do about 75% of our teacher training workshops. These are all active or retired educators. It is a requirement to join our training network that someone have experience, be an experienced educator with a background in K-12 education, whether that's formal or non-formal. But they come from a wide range of institutions teaching a whole variety of grades, subjects. Dr. Silvis here at La Roche, this is a small Catholic institution in Pittsburgh. Dr. Lane is an early childhood education specialist in South Carolina. Lauren does non-formal education at an environmental center in Georgia. So we've got people all over the place, and they are amazing. So a shout out to them. And these folks, they don't just facilitate workshops, they help us with writing curriculum, they critique curriculum, they test lesson plans, they serve as judges in our video contests, so they're a really vital asset to population education. I have talked for way too long. I know that folks have submitted questions, so that is everything I'm gonna say. Again, my name is Carol. I'm the Senior Director of Teacher Programs with the PopEd program. If you do have questions about either this specific webinar or others that have taken place in the Fall Speaker Series, we have our engagement email up here on the screen. Otherwise, I'm going to invite Natalie to our Zoom, and I know that you have some questions that folks submitted.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Carol. That was a really great presentation. We'll see how many we can get through. And if any other questions pop up, feel free to put them in the chat. Whatever we don't answer, we'll have written answers to, and we'll post them on the website and email them to everyone who's on the call. So, you know, don't feel as though your question will go unanswered just because we run out of time today. Okay, let's start with maybe the simplest one. How could someone get PopEd to come to their classroom?
Oh, great question. How did I not mention that? You can, heck, you could email this Engage email and they will forward it to me. But we have a request form on our website. When you go to populationeducation.org, in the very top menu of the toolbar, there is a button that says Request a Workshop. You can also learn more about our teacher workshops there. Oh my gosh, I have such amazing team members. Laura just pasted a link in the chat bar that gives you a link directly to that request form. And again, we do them for pre-service classes. So for college and university classes, we do in-service trainings with specific schools or districts. We facilitate at teaching conferences. We work with non-formal education venues. So hit us up.
Okay, let's see, I'm kind of jumping around. Let's see, is there any training for substitute teachers who might want to be able to interject a short lesson?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, any of our trainings would really be appropriate for substitute teachers. And while we do have some lessons that are pretty in-depth, you know, labs or research projects, we also have some that are short but impactful activities that you could easily do even in a substitute situation. So, you know, you have 45 minutes with a particular group of students. Earth the Apple of Our Eye is a great example of that. We have an activity that you can download from our website called Everything is Connected, where students create concept maps around population growth. I mean, this sort of depends on the age of the students. For young learners, I imagine if you're a substitute, you don't know what's in the classroom, so you want to keep it material light. For young learners, we have a really fun activity called Creatures in Motion that would be appropriate. So but yes, we have short activities that absolutely you could do as a substitute teacher, and a substitute would be welcome at any of our trainings.
Awesome. Okay, I will give a shortened version of this question. Do you have a suggestion for an activity that could work for a group of retired seniors who are already pretty savvy?
Ooh, who are already pretty savvy. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I would again say that the Earth the Apple of Our Eye demonstration would probably work very, very well for them. Another one that could be really interesting, especially with a savvy group. This is something we often do with our high school or even AP groups, but we have an activity called Food for Thought. It is available for free download from populationeducation.org. That is sort of a global comparison simulation where we actually populate different regions of the world. And then we have the participants take a look at a variety of different statistics within those regions, things that fall under the categories of demographics, quality of life indicators, land use and urbanization, and how am I blanking on this? Wealth and energy. And they look at these different factors and how they're playing out in different regions. What are the patterns that we see? What are the trends? What is the history behind some of these statistics? So that could be I think a really wonderful one to do in that setting.
Okay, how about, you touched on this, but in case you have more detail to add or want to give a lengthier answer, how come reproductive health isn't one of the subjects you talk about in your lessons?
Well, that is a great question. I don't know if I said why. I said that
You said you did. Yeah.
that we don't. I mean, the sort of quick answer is that health classes and comprehensive sex ed classes already exist. That does not mean that they are being utilized in every school or district, unfortunately, for a whole bunch of reasons that we don't have time to get into. But they're already out there. That curriculum already exists. There are already people doing that work. So our niche is really looking at population through like this societal and environmental lens. So that kind of goes back to the idea that what we do in population education is so unique.
Good answer.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, here's a question that just came in through the chat. Do you discuss different types of diets? For example, that being vegetarian or vegan uses much less land and water than a meat-based diet.
We do have some lessons that look at that. One in particular, unfortunately, I don't know that this one is freely available on our website, but whoever asked it, I can give it to you. It's called Meat of the Matter, and it has students explore 4 different protein types. 3 of them are animal protein and 1 is plant-based protein, and compare the land footprint of each, the water footprint of each, and the CO2 emission footprint of each. And they actually create data visualizations of these for 4 different protein types, and then do some comparison between the 2. So looking at how our footprint changes based on being a primary or secondary consumer.
I'll also plug one of your recent blog posts because I thought it was really great. I'll put it in the chat, and it talks about how much water goes into a Thanksgiving feast. So that kind of goes along with that. Let us see. So how do you counter media communications that focus on concerning ourselves with economic growth and not environmental issues?
Good question. Well, the good news is, is that we don't see this as an either or situation. So that's how we approach it with students in the classroom. So we have activities that really look directly at this with students and have them look at the combating forces of economics or environment, and get to the realization that this doesn't have to be an all or nothing game. We don't have to pick economic growth. We don't have to pick environmental growth. For instance, we have an activity that has students, it's a game that they play using poker chips. It's not Texas Hold'em, but it's a game. And they use poker chips to represent resources. And ultimately, they're working within or developing a short-term strategy to manage this resource, which the poker chips represent, but that will ultimately give them a long-term supply of the resource. So they have to sort of balance out the short-term needs and economic demands with the long-term sustainability of the resource itself. That one's called One for All. We have another activity that has students look at taking on the role of forest, of a council, I think, that has them look at the management of a forest. And you have competing stakeholders. So there are some of which are economic stakeholders, some of which are environmental stakeholders, but then there are other stakeholders as well. And they play this board game where they actually have to sort of take on the role of one of these stakeholders and make arguments for or against certain things. What ultimately ends up happening is, again, though, that it's not like an economics wins or the environment wins. They ultimately see that these things can happen in tandem if done in certain appropriate managed ways.
Okay, I think we can fit in 2 more questions. Okay, let me try to say this one in a shorter format. So the book Drawdown discusses priority actions we can take to combat climate change, and identifies educating women in family planning, which they say should be combined, as the #1 action for reversing global warming. Do you ever include that emphasis in your training?
Yes, I mean, not this particular book, I should say, but we have a number of lessons that focus on climate change. But I will point out that I think sort of our unique take in our lessons on climate change is that we don't actually teach the science of climate change. We look at the human dimension of climate change, meaning the connections between things like population growth trends and carbon emissions. We have one lesson in particular. It's called Carbon Crunch, that actually has students dig into how humans, and especially some of the most vulnerable and marginalized populations in the world, are being affected differently by climate change, and how wealth plays into a country's ability to cope with climate change. So when we think of climate risk factors, it's not just thinking about the risk factors themselves, but what are different communities or populations' ability to deal with that based on a whole variety of other factors. And then we also do have activities that look at some of those solutions that you mentioned that come up in Drawdown. I remember a report came out with that information, right? Yeah. Where, that wasn't too long ago. Yeah. So, but we have lessons that look at, for instance, the link between girls' education rates and fertility rates. And it does it both through qualitative storytelling, where students explore some photo essays that come from the UN Girls Education Initiative, but also look at some graphic representation just of data, looking at both historic and current data on schooling, numbers of year of schooling versus fertility, as to see some of those connections. And then I'll also mention we have our student video contest that I mentioned, the World of 7 Billion student video contest 2 years ago, I believe. As a follow-up to the contest, we started offering a teen activism kit. And this is so once teachers have their students participate in the video contest, they can take all of this information that they've learned and now become impassioned about and want to make a difference in. And they can use some of the tools that we provide in this activism kit, where we give some concrete examples of things that they can do right now as a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old to raise awareness and make a difference.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
I think
okay.
it did.
I feel like I kind of went all over the place there.
It's a complicated question. Okay, this one, hopefully we'll just put this one in because it's very timely. Have you created any lessons on population and pandemics?
We haven't.
Okay.
Yet.
Right.
But we do already have a couple related resources. I know I have several of my team members out there, so I don't think we have, but we do have some related resources. For instance, we have a lesson called Catch It If You Can that mimics disease spread in a population. And then I feel a little bit like a broken record with our student video contest, but one of our topics of the contest this year, there are 3 challenges that students can choose to relate population growth to. One of those challenges is strengthening global health. And so a student could absolutely tackle the population pandemic link in a video that they developed for the World of 7 Billion contest. And let's be real, COVID and the ongoing pandemic is the reason that we chose that as one of our topics for this year's contest.
Okay, I think that takes us to the end of our questions and the end of time. So thank you again, Carol. Thank you everyone for joining us. Once again, if questions come up, please email us at engage@popconnect.org and you can get to Carol that way as well. We will forward direct questions to her. And yeah, thank you for joining us again. We will have more of these after the new year. So hope everyone has a wonderful December and thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. This was so fun.